Hey friends, this is Mark Suroviec, host of the Workplace Solutions podcast, inviting you to discover the joy of work. My guest today is Phil Brown. He is the lead trainer for High Five Adventure and co-author of Tinker, and also the host of the podcast Vertical Playpen. All right, so kind of switching gears a little bit, you are a trainer. What are some of the things that are on your mind, either when you're preparing for leading a training? We'll start with preparing and then move into, as the training's going on, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I would say in terms of like the preparation for a training, I've got really good at trying to meet the needs of the groups that I'm working with. So when people ask us for some form of training, they've got goals in mind. We're sending them a training goals form. So nothing that we do is necessarily cookie cutter. So people may have a training, they might want to focus on connection-based activities, or they might want to focus on conflict resolution and dialogue sessions. In those cases, obviously, I have to change up some of the information that I'm giving and the information I'm sharing. So something to consider for me is often timeliness. How much time do I have and how much activity can I squeeze within that time and still find it valuable? I'm not necessarily going to want to do like a machine gunning of lots of information if I feel like it might be too overwhelming. And I want to be able to leave the group with some actionable things that they can immediately put into practice, so they don't need anything more other than these are the tools, this is how I'm going to use it. So I'm often trying to consider like how long is stuff going to take? How long do I need to engage the participants in? But also how much actionable information can I give them on the back end that's actually going to be useful to them? And then I think that really ties into when I'm there during the training. I often say this to people I'm training, that I want people to become thinking practitioners. And what I mean by that is that they don't leave the training and someone says, well, why are you doing this? And they say, well, because Phil told me. Like, I want them to be able to know the reasons why. So I'm always very intentional about trying to teach the why behind stuff. So in the training itself, I may do a sequence of activities and be the facilitator with a facilitator hat on. And then I'll take that off and swap on the trainer hat and have a conversation about my sequencing, why I chose these activities, what I think they give me, and what I think they give the participants I work with. Which are two things to consider, which I think that some people don't often consider when they're thinking of sequencing programming, is not just what is the benefit to the participant, but what is the benefit to you as the facilitator. And it might be that I don't have to speak anymore. That might be a valid thing for you to consider as a facilitator, because that's something I often try to teach, is as a really good facilitator of team development, leadership development programming, you should aim to talk less and listen more. So if you know that you are inserting your voice too much into a group, that's something to consider. So there's lots of different layers to facilitation. And I think that that's the thing I get really excited about. And it's often people, when I'm teaching, don't necessarily know that's going to be the case if they're new. They might be just, give me games, right? Give me the games and let me deal with it. But there's so much interplay between what I say and what I don't say, and the order in which I do stuff, and the reading of the group, and the taking the time to listen. That's where I get excited for the work that I do, because every group that I interact with is unique, and every single day is not going to be the same. So I hope I answered your question there. I kind of went off, but
no,
yeah.
That was great. You used an industry term that not everyone may be familiar with, sequencing. Can you just speak to that for a second? What is that in the context?
Yeah. So in the context of when we're planning an agenda, it's the order in which I'm going to do some activities or have some discussion points that is going to get the best out of either the goals that I'm trying to achieve or the flow of energy that I want to achieve in a program. So it's the order in which I'm placing some activities. So I often think about it in a couple of ways. One is I try to think of flow of energy. So if I've just done an activity that's been very, very deep in conversation and maybe has elicited some emotions in some way, then the next thing I'm not going to do is another deep, meaningful conversation. I'm going to try to throw in something that's going to lighten the mood slightly and maybe re-energize the participants that I work with. Also, if I know that I'm going to do some problem-solving activities, that might be challenging the group. I'm going to do some activities that are before that to prep them for that as well. So it's leading them in. A poor example of a sequence could be that the first activity you do when you meet a group is an activity called helium hoop or helium stick, where you're asking people to put their fingers underneath a hula hoop or a stick and lower it to the ground. Now, it's a very frustrating activity, simple in its description, but challenging in its execution. And if I did that the first time with a non-intact group or even an intact group, they're probably just going to get irritated with each other. And what I've poorly done there is not necessarily set them up for that moment. So I need to do some little bit of prep work, depending on your goals. If there has been times where I've moved my activities around, and I think that that's a little bit more of an advanced practice to say I'm intentionally going to put an activity in here that I know is going to irritate, because that's something I've been told is a outcome that they have on a regular basis, that this group has conflict, and I might need to see it. So there might be moments where I do that, but it's intended around then adding stuff that I can then have time to discuss it. So it's just the order in which you do stuff.
Well said. If it's all right, it reminds me of a story. I was working this program back in my freelance days, and it was a ropes course program, and a lot of folks from the area were coming to work at this facility, and the guy running the program basically said, hey, you can do any activity you want, just don't do the Trustfall. That's the only one we're not going to do today. And one of the other facilitators decided not to, one, ignore the guy paying him, which was dumb, but to decided to do that activity first. So the group arrived. He's like, all right, everybody make 2 lines. We're going to do a Trustfall. And then he proceeded to Trustfall himself. I'm just there's 1,000 things wrong with that. I'm just going, he was never asked to work back.
Yep.
But that's vivid in my mind of why on earth would you get off a bus and then do a Trustfall? That's just almost malpractice.
There is a level of new facilitator that, because they only know so much, they're limited in their ability to be able to change on the fly, that I've seen people given an agenda has this is what you're doing. And then they're with the group, and no matter what happens, they still commit to that agenda. And it just flops from that point on, because there's had a moment that doesn't go well, and then everything after that isn't well sequenced. So now everything kind of flops behind that because they don't have the ability to alter or change dependent on the group. You mentioned Trustfall. I have to share this. I work for an organization that builds challenge courses. So we build challenge courses, we inspect them, and we train on them. And it's part of my job to teach that stuff. We get called in occasionally for incidences that occur on a course. It might be a structural thing, and that's normally where the first port of call is is it a structural component or is it a training component? And I got called in to assess a site who had, on a Trustfall platform, had 6 people fall. So 6 people get hurt. But when I got there, I didn't realize this until I got there, that it was 6 in a row. So I want to just try to play out how the mindset of what could have occurred here. So a participant climbs up onto a platform that's about 3 feet up, and then is getting ready to fall in the arms of the other participants. That person falls and hits the ground. Either they don't catch them. The facilitator then goes, who wants to go next? But then that happens 5 more times. I want to know who the kid or the participant was who was the 6th person who had just seen 5 of their colleagues, 5 of their peers fall and go, yeah, I'll give it a go.
I think you mentioned the definition of insanity earlier in the conversation.
And I was being brought in, and I was asked, why do you think that happened? And I said, it's very hard to not be judgmental in these situations.
There's a management quote, and I'm going to butcher it, and I don't know off the top of my head who it's attributed to, but the concept is the system is perfectly designed to get the results that you get. So whatever system you have, whatever results you get, the system that you have is designed to get the results you have, whether you've designed it that way on purpose or not. Often not, but it sounds like that system was designed to get 6 people falling in a row because of something that was off.
It's just utter crazy in its execution.
I could talk Trustfall stories all day. I'll share one quick one and then we'll move on. I was doing a training. I used to do some part-time training with another ropes course vendor, and I was leading a training on the Trustfall, and the participant who was about to fall had a bulge in his cargo pocket of his pants, and I was like, "Hey, what is that?" He's like, "Oh, that's my handgun." It's like, he was a campus security person. It was at a college, and so that was normal for him to have a weapon on him. But it's like, let's please take the large one, even if it wasn't a gun. It's like a 5-pound chunk of metal that you don't want to try to catch when somebody's falling. But I'm just like, okay, I'm glad we double checked everything. Oh wow. Man, that's just insane.
That is incredible. What an incredible story.
Oh, all right. So moving on, tell us of a time you've witnessed transformation in a group of people where you actually got to see it or experience it at a later date. So kind of who are you working with, as much as you can share that detail, but kind of who were they and what happened and what makes that story memorable for you?
Yeah, I think that there was a training that I was leading maybe 4 years ago. Obviously, the time isn't that important, and it was a school that worked with at-risk youth. So it was a boarding school that brought in kids who were at risk, and the staff that worked at that school, for a large percentage of them, were also, when they were kids, at-risk kids who went through that program. It had a really incredible alumni that then ended up working at that same site because of the impact that school had on them. And I was leading a 5-day training where I was teaching them adventure learning basics, and also then teaching them how to use a course that we'd built on this at their school site, so a challenge course. But I did the full training, and it got to day 5, and I was doing a final reflection on the training using a set of cards. I'm going to show them up to the screen, but they're called Ubuntu. It's a deck that we at High Five make, but essentially they're image-based cards that create metaphor. And I used them at the start of the training and asked people to pick a card that meant something to them in some way, and they kept hold of those cards throughout the training, and I would have them bring those cards back up and say if now the image had any new meaning to them in some way. And I was asking them to do an activity where they were, it was like a timeline. So I put a piece of rope or webbing on the ground, and I indicate that one side is the start of the first day when I first met you, all the way up until this point now. And I want you to share a point during this training that was impactful to you. And they put their cards down to symbolize where they are in that timeline, so we get to see everyone's visual cards. And this one participant, she waited until the very end. Everyone was sharing, and she was hesitant to share. And I realized that she was hesitant to share because when she was going to share, she knew it was going to be emotional sharing. And what she shared was that she was a kid that went through this program. She was now in her 60s. She'd worked at this school for many decades, and she was due to retire. And she was excited to learn something new. But what she reflected on the most was not the skills that I taught, not the activities that I taught, but it was the experience of playing that was so meaningful to her, because in her entire life, and this was kind of shocking to me, in her entire life, she had never played before. She had never experienced play in the sense of which we were playing, which I referred to as not childish, but childlike. That's the reason. That's something I really like about the work that we do, is it's seen as childish sometimes in the outset, but I refer to it more as childlike. And she hadn't played in 60 plus years, or however old she was. And she just got so emotional, started crying and hugging everyone. And I welled up. I'm an empath, so I was like crying too. And I hadn't realized the importance of the work we do. And there have been a couple occasions where that kind of thing has happened, but I hadn't realized the power of just the actual doing the thing that we do on a regular basis, because it's so normal to me that I sometimes forget what it's like to be like either new and never experienced the kind of work we do. But the concept of being new to even play, because she had such a rough upbringing that she had never really engaged as a kid. She hadn't had the opportunity to be a child. She grew up really fast because of her circumstances. And she never actually experienced any of the tag games or any of that stuff we experienced. And it was very touching to me. It's still one of those things that I think back to that moment, and that's what ties me to keep doing the work. I'm sure there are stories that you have or other people have that are similar in that vein, where you witness someone experiencing something that, and you honestly think like, did I do anything? But I think that that's the word facilitation is to make easy, right? We're facilitating a program where someone used this, a phrase, and I really like this, that we're not sages on the stage, we're guides on the side. And I really liked that notion. And I guided this person into an experience of play that she'd never had. And it was incredibly meaningful.
That's fantastic. Love it. All right. So we have time for one or two more questions. Let's do this one. Spin the wheel of embarrassing moments. Tell us a story of professional failure where you screwed up and what you learned from it.
So this was actually an experience I had when I was a paraprofessional. In England, it was called a teaching assistant. When I first got into education, in order to help me get my foot in the door of education, I did 2 years of being a paraprofessional, working with special ed kids. So I was a one-to-one with some autistic kids, and I found it it was very helpful for me in learning how to interact with different populations and helped me grow up. And there was one kid in particular who I had got really used to. I'd been working with him a year and a half, and I could sense his tells when he was going to get into an agitated position, a highly emotional position, and I didn't work with him every single class. So I was on a break and I was walking in a hallway of the school, and I look towards a room that I can tell that this kid is in, and I'm looking off into this room, and I notice that this person is getting agitated, and I can see he's getting heated. Now, in my young professional brain, I thought, I'm going to be a hero. I'm going to go into this, I'm going to burst into this room, and I'm going to alleviate this problem because I've sensed what's happening here, and the teacher is going to be proud, and I'm going to be hearing about this. And in my excitement to be the hero of this moment, I went to reach for the door handle, and I missed the door handle, and because I'm trying to react so abruptly, I wanted to burst in, have this very cool moment. I slipped the handle, and I smashed my head into the door. Now, what I didn't realize is I completely knocked myself out. I wake up in the nurse's office on a bed with an ice pack on my head, and I'm like, what am I doing here? The last thing I remember was going to reach for this door handle. And I am told that I had knocked my head, passed out, and the abruptness of that experience, me smacking my head, had actually alleviated the problem. So win for me. I actually did solve the problem. But everyone was alerted just hearing this smash, boom, into a door, and then a collapse sound, and run out and see Mr. Brown laying on the floor, completely out cold. And I had to get carried, obviously, to the nurse's office. And from that point on, for the rest of the time that I worked there, I had to experience the laughter of teens, because I worked in a high school, the laughter of these teens in the corridor.
They're so forgiving.
So forgiving. They immediately forgot that. And from that point on, I had to live with the giggles because I had knocked myself out trying to be a hero. So the lesson I had from that is take a breath and pause and think, and also know that I don't have to be the one to solve those problems. So in the work that I do now, I think it's still useful of like not reacting, but like actually taking that moment to look and pause and let a group, and also from a team development perspective, not jump in and try to solve stuff. Like if I'm dealing with a group who are doing a problem solving activity, let them be. It's often the hardest people for like, I think when I work with school groups, the teacher hasn't got an awareness of our stuff, them wanting to intervene and help because they're seeing people struggle. I think that's that telling point for me. Let people struggle, because the last thing you want to do is embarrass yourself and knock yourself out in front of all the kids and then have teens tease you for a year.
And I'm guessing with that, that teacher or that coach that doesn't know how to interact in that environment, you pull them off to the side at some point and say, hey, let them struggle through the activity.
Yeah, what I've actually started doing now is especially with particularly school groups that I work with, or even if it's a corporate group and there might be a supervisor present or being a part of it, I might pull them aside and say, this is what I'm going to do with the participants I'm working with, and this is what I'm going to try to see, and guide them and say, I want you to participate, but I don't need you to solve all the problems, especially if there is a problem that might present itself, because I'm not going to learn much other than you save them every time, which can be a challenge. But anyone I speak to who does this work, often teachers or teachers or parents tend to be the ones that are the hard ones to work with because of that need to try to be maternal instinct to save.
All right, let's go with final question. What's something I haven't asked, but you're burning to answer?
Yeah, it's a challenging one. I would say something around like, what do you feel like my industry needs to do better? Because I think like sometimes we focus on the things that we're doing really well. And I often hear people say like the work that we do is the best work, right? And so I try to think of like, what is something that we need to do to improve? For me, I think that there is, and you sort of have suggested it, Mark, even in like, if people are unaware, you used insider language. Like I use sequencing, or we may use the term facilitation. Outside of our industry, I don't know many people who use those terms. And I will work with a lot of people and they won't know. If I say I'm a facilitator, they'll say, what is that? It's not a word that the elevator speech for people who will do the work that I do is very challenging, I've found. And so I think that there is marketing issues. I refer to sometimes people who don't know our industry as muggles. That's a Harry Potter reference, because they haven't seen the magic, right, of what we do. And when we do it, they see the magic, then they're like, oh, this is so cool. How do we keep doing this, right? But if it's that cool and it's that magical, we don't have the need to keep our magic a secret in the same way that wizards did. We want to share that stuff. So I think that there has to be an adaptability to be flexible with the language or meet people where they're at more. Because from my perspective, I want people to know that this is a career, because I want more people to do this and, grow this field. There's so much work out there in terms of another reference. Experiential education is everything. And especially now, social emotional learning is higher. Everyone's mindset. Every single one of us that is a human in this planet is experiencing some form of emotional experience right now. That I think is on us to try to work with and talk to people. And I'd love for more people to know that people like us exist, because I want to be able to spread it. I'm a trainer, so I teach this stuff. And the more I can do that, the better off it is for the entire industry. But I think it comes from marketing. I think we're a little insulated. We sort of reference as well that, where's this activity come from? Is it Jim Cain, or is it Michelle Cummings, or is it Chris Cavert? Everyone who's in this industry knows the same people. And I think that's good, but it's also, there's a lot of people doing this work. So spreading the information and making it broader, and keeping reinvigorating the field. I think that those things are what I encourage people to do, and I encourage students to do whenever I see them.
Love it. So final thoughts, and where can people find you?
Final thoughts is that I encourage people to go out and play in whatever form that is from them, because as I've referenced, like play is powerful, and I would try to get past the notion that it's a childish pursuit. I mentioned like childlike versus childish. Playful, and you experience this, I'm experiencing this as a parent. Like, I get to play now, and I get to the caveat of that I've got a kid, so that's why I'm playful. But I wanted to do it beforehand. I remember going to Disney World without kids. It was still fun, right? I know it can sometimes be like, oh, now I've got a kid, I can go to Disney World or something. But the act of like just being playful doesn't have to be being goofy. It could be like art. It could be reading, whatever takes you out of that world of work, and try to combine that into the day-to-day, and also take time out of your day to play, not just be work and then play as the opposite of it, that one doesn't exist without the other. And then how people can find me is my email is pbrown@high5adventure.org. That's HIGH, the number 5adventure.org. You can listen to me ramble on more at Vertical Playpen. That's the podcast that I host. And you can also find that on Instagram, if you're there, at Vertical Playpen. And that's I'm throwing educational resources on a visual medium there, as well as the audio medium with the podcast.
Love it. Kind of my final thoughts. This was a lot of fun. I want to hang out with you more. I want to thank Phil and his willingness to be on the show, especially as we're recording with a new software today, and that seems to have worked. Thank you, Phil. I wish you the best in your pursuits.
Thanks, all. Thanks, Mark.
Life is way too short for work to suck. So if you want help to build your team, train your team, or manage your team, we're here. Come see us at workplaysolutions.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast.
Hang on, my daughter's just telling me she's got her teeth out. That's awesome, B. I'm on a call right now. Can you show me later? Okay, love you.